Pope Francis, the first non-European pontiff in nearly 1,300 years, has passed away at the age of 88, the Vatican announced. Was his death normal, or there is something behind his death? Is something fishy? We need to know that. The news came as a shock to many, especially as it followed less than 24 hours after the Pope made a high-profile public appearance. Though he seemed less energetic than usual during his Sunday address, he still managed to speak to a large crowd of worshippers. Across the world, hearts are heavy with loss. The man who touched millions with his humility, love, and courage is no longer with us. Pope Francis Jorge Mario Bergoglio has left us, but his legacy, his spirit, and his message remain. He was a shepherd to the poor and marginalized, a voice for the voiceless, and his work will echo through history. Britain's King Charles has paid tribute to Pope Francis, expressing deep sorrow over his passing. He and his wife, Queen Camilla, said they were most deeply saddened to hear of the Pope's death, but found comfort in the fact that Francis was able to share an Easter greeting with the Church just a day before he passed. His Holiness will be remembered for his compassion, his dedication to church unity, and his unwavering commitment to the shared causes of people of faith and those of goodwill striving to help others, King Charles said, according to Buckingham Palace. His conviction that caring for creation is a profound expression of faith in God resonated deeply with countless people around the world. King Charles said he and Queen Camilla were deeply moved to have had the opportunity to visit Pope Francis just days before his passing, during their state visit to Italy in celebration of their 20th wedding anniversary. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer also paid tribute, noting his leadership during a complex and challenging time for both the world and the Church was often marked by courage, yet always rooted in profound humility. Pope Francis was a voice for the poor, the marginalized, and the forgotten. He remained deeply connected to the struggles of human vulnerability, reaching out to Christians around the world enduring war, famine, persecution, and poverty. Pope Francis's passing on Monday morning came as a surprise to many, following several high-profile appearances over the Easter weekend. Although he did not preside over the main Holy Week and Easter services central to the Christian calendar, he remained visibly present through brief but meaningful moments. On Thursday, he spent half an hour visiting a prison in Rome. 2 days later, on Saturday evening, he appeared at St. Peter's Basilica. And on Easter Sunday, he uplifted thousands by delivering the traditional Easter blessing from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. The White House has released an initial tribute to the late Pope Francis, posting rest in peace on X alongside photos of President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance meeting the pontiff. Trump met with Pope Francis during a visit to the Vatican in 2017, while Vance had a brief encounter with the Pope on Sunday just 1 day before his passing. The day before his death, Pope Francis received a visit from a world leader with whom he had recently clashed over immigration policy. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who appears to have been the last world leader to meet with the Pope, spent a brief time with him in a reception room at the Casa Santa Marta, the Vatican guest house where Francis has lived since his election in 2013. Vance's visit on Sunday lasted less than 20 minutes, and the meeting had not been publicly announced in advance. During their brief time together, the Pope presented Vance with a tie, rosaries, and 3 large chocolate Easter eggs for Vance's children. Though Vance, a self-described baby Catholic who converted to the faith as an adult, had previously disagreed with Francis on issues like mass deportations, their differences did not surface during this encounter. "I pray for you every day," Vance was heard telling the Pope as they sat together at the Vatican. Born in 1936 in the heart of Buenos Aires, Jorge Mario Bergoglio's early life was a far cry from the grandeur of the Vatican. His family, immigrants from Italy, lived modestly, and young Jorge quickly learned the value of hard work. To support his family, he worked as a janitor, and later as a bouncer in a bar, living the life of the people he would one day serve. He wasn't born with privilege, but it was through these very struggles, these simple, everyday experiences, that Jorge learned the lessons that would shape him into the leader he would become. In the streets of Buenos Aires, he saw poverty, hardship, and resilience lessons that stayed with him as he stepped into the priesthood. "Come from a family that struggled, that taught me how to be humble, how to serve others without expecting anything in return." As he rose through the ranks of the Church, Jorge Mario Bergoglio never lost sight of his roots. Even when the world began to take notice of him, he remained grounded. A man of humility, shaped by the very people he would one day serve. From a janitor to a priest, from the streets of Buenos Aires to the Vatican, Pope Francis remained one of the people. Pope Francis, the first non-European pontiff in nearly 1,300 years, has passed away at the age of 88, the Vatican has confirmed. The news came as a shock to many, especially since it followed less than 24 hours after the Pope made a high-profile public appearance. Though he appeared less engaged than usual on Sunday, he still addressed a large crowd of worshippers. Francis delivered the traditional Easter blessing from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, marking his most prominent appearance since being discharged from the hospital. Prior to that, he had a brief meeting with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. Francis's death comes just weeks after his release from a Rome hospital, where he battled a life-threatening case of pneumonia affecting both of his lungs. His medical team had reported that his condition had stabilized, allowing him to continue recovering at his Casa Santa Marta residence within the Vatican. Just 2 weeks after his discharge, he made a surprise appearance in St. Peter's Square, much to the delight of the faithful. Throughout his pontificate, Francis was a staunch advocate for migrants, often criticizing U.S. President Donald Trump's deportation policies. His tenure was also marked by sharp opposition to the rise of nationalist populism. However, he frequently faced criticism from conservative Catholic factions in the U.S. Pope Francis brought a more humble and progressive approach to the Vatican, seeking to soften the Church's stance on social issues like homosexuality, the death penalty, and the role of women. Yet, his papacy was also marred by the persistent scandal of child sex abuse, a crisis that has long undermined trust in the Church. His death will ignite discussions about the future direction of the Catholic Church, with cardinals from around the world expected to gather in Rome to mourn the Pope and soon begin the process of electing his successor. From the moment he ascended to the papacy, Pope Francis became a revolutionary voice within the Catholic Church, a man who would stand not just for tradition but for change. His papacy was marked by bold action, speaking for those who had long been ignored, those whose voices had been silenced. Unlike any of his predecessors, Pope Francis raised his voice for the marginalized, those on the fringes of society. He spoke out on issues like climate change, poverty, and the rights of LGBTQ+ individuals, challenging the Church to embrace a more inclusive, compassionate stance. His actions were revolutionary. Not just his words, his actions. He washed the feet of prisoners, showing the world that no one is beyond redemption. He visited the sick, embraced the outcasts, and called for a church that served the poor and downtrodden, not just the powerful. In a world divided by borders and walls, Pope Francis called for unity, for love that transcends differences. He challenged the world and his own church to look beyond the status quo and seek true justice. His message was clear. A church that does not embrace the poor and the suffering is not a church at all. His papacy became a beacon of hope for many, a voice for the voiceless. Whether it was speaking out on behalf of refugees or addressing climate change, Pope Francis always stood where others feared to tread. His message echoed around the world: love, mercy, and compassion above all. Despite his revolutionary vision, Pope Francis faced significant resistance. His calls for change were met with fierce opposition, not just from outside the Church, but from within. Traditionalists, some of them powerful cardinals, resisted his reforms, accusing him of straying too far from Catholic orthodoxy. His push for a more inclusive church, a church that embraced the poor, the LGBTQ+ community, and those who had been ignored, was met with fierce backlash. In the eyes of some, he was challenging the very foundation of the Church's teachings. Though Pope Francis stood firm in his beliefs, the resistance was palpable. Tension between progress and tradition created a rift, one that would define his reign. And then there were the scandals, the deep wounds within the Church that he could not fully heal. The child abuse scandals, the cover-ups, the secrets. Despite his tireless efforts, Pope Francis faced the painful reality that some battles couldn't be won. We must make amends, we must hold ourselves accountable, but some wounds, they are deep and they will take time to heal. Even as he took bold steps to confront the darkness within the Church, Pope Francis bore the weight of impossible expectations. The scars of the past, the corruption, the betrayals were not easily erased. He carried the burden of healing, even as some saw him as a threat to tradition. As we bid farewell to Pope Francis, we are left not with just the memories of a man, but with a legacy, one that transcends time, borders, and belief. His papacy was defined by love, humility, and a deep sense of justice. He changed the course of history not through power or authority, but through compassion. He showed us that leadership is not about titles, but about service. that the true measure of a man is found in his ability to lift others up. His actions spoke louder than words, washing the feet of prisoners, standing in solidarity with refugees, calling for an end to war and poverty. Pope Francis embodied the very message of Christ's love, mercy, and humility. These words are his legacy. They will endure long after his passing, inspiring generations to come. Pope Francis leaves behind a world more compassionate, more connected, and more hopeful, a world that will remember his unwavering call for mercy, for justice, and for love. In his journey, Pope Francis taught us to live with kindness, to serve with humility, and to lead with compassion. His legacy is not just in the actions he took, but in the hearts he touched, in the lives he changed. And in that, he will never truly be gone.